insight, we talk a lot about what we think is important for folks in the group to be thinking about ongoing, and that's something that we call reflective practice. And during our Think sessions, we want to root our reflective practice around specifically white fragility. We've talked about this in other sessions that we've had. We've offered you. Some of you have been to other workshops that we've hosted on this issue. But we believe, this is just like one of our core tenets, we can disagree or we can agree, all we want, but we think this is really important for us to grapple with. We believe that one of the greatest barriers to moving forward as institutions is white fragility. So it's actually not lack of knowledge, it's not lack of awareness or bad intention or bad practice, although white fragility is a poor practice. It's this block that we often as white folks unexamined have a high level of white fragility. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to play something that somebody sent. Well, actually I want to share something first. I was with a friend in the car the other day and I was upset about something. And I felt really self-righteous about it, right? Because of course when you're upset by something, you feel slighted. It's often easy to start getting, and I could name all the ways in which this person had slighted me. And they were real, they were real. And then I said, you know what I didn't know is I just didn't know how to save it. And my friend Marcus White, he's a colleague of mine, he said, wow, where did that come from? Where did that desire to save come from? Why did you use that verb? Why did you need to save this thing? And it was that moment where I was being called out on my white fragility in some way. And it was hard to hear, right? Because I was so ready to be right, and in many ways I was right. But it didn't excuse the fact that I was bringing in a whole lot of my white fragility. This is 4 days ago. I can give you, just since the last time I saw you, 5 different examples where my colleagues have called into the room my white fragility. And I consider myself someone who thinks about this 24/7. If you know me personally in any way, you know that when we go to lunch, that's all I talk about, is white fragility. And so this is how pervasive it is, that somebody who thinks about this, I think is well-tooled, is constantly steeped in her own white fragility. And so we want to start today by asking for a reflective moment around this issue. But first I want to play something to you that, or for you, that somebody recently sent to me from, who knows who Robin DiAngelo is? You all read the Robin DiAngelo work? So if you have a notebook, you might want to write that one down. Robin DiAngelo is the person that coined white fragility, the term white fragility. It's a wonderful essay, you can find it on PDF. I personally believe that you can't do any type of work in racial justice if you haven't read this particular, one, her book, but 2, this particular article. And so 2 weeks ago, she gave the keynote address at the Courageous Conversations Conference in Detroit. And I just want to play with you. This comes in, she's already been talking for about 3 minutes. I'm going to play 2 minutes for you. She's a white theorist, a white professor, woman. So she's going to talk about what it is to be a white feminist in 2017. Not like many of us don't know what that's like.
Rarely ever being challenged racially, and I really just have not had to build my capacity in any way. And so on the rare occasion that I do get called in, and honestly, simply suggesting that white has any meaning will trigger white fragility. Simply suggesting that you can know anything about me just because I'm white. Ooh, that's going to trigger white fragility because you just challenged individuality, right? And you know, white fragility is weak in the sense that I can't bear it. But it's incredibly powerful in its effect to stop the challenge. I need you to not do that. I need to be in my racial equilibrium and comfort zone, and I will do what I need to do to make it stop. If I need to cry, I'll do that. If I need to get my back up. And in that, I think white fragility actually functions as a form of racial bullying. I'm going to make it so miserable for you to talk to me about my inevitable racist worldview, racist patterns, racist bias, and investments in racism that I could not help but have as a result of being raised in this culture. I'm going to make it so miserable for you to talk to me about that you just don't do it. And in that, it functions as a very powerful form of everyday white racial control.
Say that
I'm
again.
not the 1%. I've actually never even been a manager of anybody. But I can keep you in your place and be in my place by being so difficult that you don't bother that you got to get through another day. Right? And
So I'm going to pause it there. This clip that I have, and I'm happy to send it to you, is 7 minutes long. I listen to it about every 2 days because I need to check in every 2 days on this issue. And this just the 7 minute, I can't find the whole keynote, they haven't sent it out yet. Otherwise, I'll send you the link on YouTube. I'm sure it'll be published at some point. But I'm happy to send you that. It's an incredible 7 minutes that you're just picking up, where she talks about then the role that we all play and we're complicit. But I want to take what she says, 2 things that she says. She talks about white fragility as a form of racial bullying, right? And white fragility as a form of racial control. And I think this is something that oftentimes we as white folks that have considerable amount of power don't take into consideration the power that this fragility and this sensitivity has over others. So what I want to invite us to do for this reflective practice is to partner with somebody you don't know. And if you're not comfortable in this, then please you can step out of this, because I realize not everybody identifies as white, first of all, and I want to create a safe space that we're not putting more pressure on people of color. But I'd like you to partner with somebody you don't know or you don't know well. So that means you're going to have to get up. We only have like 2 minutes for this exercise, so I'm going to, there you go. We're at a panel, or we were at the We the People Summit this weekend, and a group, it was a mostly white group in attendance. We were talking about intersectionality, and they said, you know, how do we learn more about intersectionality? How do we learn more about fragility? And this is something we've had conversations on many, many times. And I want to ask, by a show of hands, how many people in the room have what we call a community of practice, of people that you consider to be friends and colleagues, that you are talking about, one, your white fragility with, in an active way, in some way that you have a conversation in some way, or folks that you are talking about your cultural practice, a community of practice that you can talk about your cultural work with those who are often most impacted. How many of you have a community of practice? That's just a sort of a question that you can have that robust conversation with. Cool. So that was one of our biggest recommendations, is that having folks that we can talk about these things with in honest ways that are not people that work for us. So I had a conversation last week with a colleague, and she said, you know, my boss keeps coming up to me and asking about the culture, she's a white woman, about cultural work that's happening that I disagree with, and I can't tell her the truth, because every time I tell her, you know, there's a cognitive dissonance that happens. And so what often happens, and I think if you listen to the D'Angelo clip, and we'll send that out, because I think you'll hear how that is described, especially in our workplaces. So we want to offer you that. We're going to continue to presence white fragility, and again, toxic white fragility. I always think of white fragility as always already toxic, but I appreciate that. I'm going to think about how that changes it for me. With this, I want us to kind of center into our feet, if we just want to bring ourselves to center. Take a second. And then can we rebalance the circle a little bit? Because I know we have people come in, and so everybody is sort of not looking over somebody is like right here or shoulder. I would have done this, you know, 2 minutes ago, but this feels like a better moment. And I would just invite us to close our eyes for a minute. Because maybe this is the first time we've just been in traffic, just to recenter before we invite Jacqueline in. It's kind of a natural break. Just closing our eyes, breathing into your stomach. You can keep your eyes closed. I'll do the intro, and then you can open, and I will be gone. I'm so excited to introduce Jacqueline Russell. I came to know her as a colleague first, and followed her work for about 1.5 years before we became friends. And then before we had local jokes. And I feel like that's when you're friends, when you can joke in those sort of shorthand moments. I've learned from her so much about contemporary Indigenous arts practices, about cultural equity, and about ways of seeing and knowing that have been new to me. And she has offered me many, many moments of unlearning, just by example. Seeing the way that she approaches the questions that she's asking in her practice have been great moments of mentorship, and I feel very, very grateful to work with her in this. She is coming from New Mexico. She has family here. She's both Arizona and New Mexico. But she is here just for 36 hours to do this 1-hour conversation with us, which is a think session. These are dialogical moments, so we'll be breaking and having these conversations together, and then we'll open it up at the end a little bit for kind of a bigger dialogue together that Ashley will help facilitate there. So without further ado, I invite Jack and Marcel. Thank you so much.
Good evening. I am, kind of want to frame the talk that it's not even a talk. Already deconstructing. So the kind of conversation that we're going to have is around a value that I grew up with. I'm Navajo. We call ourselves Diné people. But my company is called Grown Up Navajo, and it's really founded on this principle and dialogue around what it means to be a grown-up. This idea of like looking at it as a Nasaktaneh or Navajo woman, understanding that it is a phase of always becoming and recognizing that we're always constantly thinking about what we're going to do when we're a grown-up. So it's this kind of always reaching type of practice. And this really comes from being grounded and having been raised in a traditional home up in the northeastern part of our state. And Zin is the topic kind of framework that I'm sharing today. To think about throughout, this is kind of a challenge in terms of the subtitle of this conversation that we're having is appreciation as a community building practice. And recognizing that how is this appreciation that I'm offering different from what we know of it? Because appreciation, as soon as we say it, becomes, oh, I really appreciate your culture. That it becomes this type of othering, and that's not necessarily what I hope you can see in the way that it is my practice. And that the way that it is as it is lived out through my work as an artist and poet, as an installation artist, as an entrepreneur, that Zin looks really different. And so if we can kind of just think about that and not necessarily as appreciation of Indigenous or Native American culture, which to me is a very passive, and one of the biggest hurdles that we have as Indigenous people is people appreciating and honoring us, okay? So, that being said, I want to begin by just kind of first asking you all, how many of you have been here before in this park? Okay, how many of you are familiar with the history of the Indian school experience? So kind of somewhat, okay. I want to bring that into just kind of as a framework for what we're going to do, because we're going to head on into this new building that has been created in my work, which I'll share a little bit more in my past life. I was at the Heard Museum as the Education and Public Programs Director, and I was there for 11 years. And it was really exciting for that, my first job out of college, to be my dream job, to be this really awesome experience. And we'll talk more about those tensions that exist within that system. But also, I think within that, became much more familiar with the Indian school experience because of the Heard having held their Remembering Our Indian School Days experience. I want to bring that into the conversation as we kind of move to meet Patty, who's over in the next room, to kind of frame it, because that she has a very personal experience having been an alumni of the Phoenix Indian School. And I think it's really important for us to kind of hear that first perspective, because I don't want to speak for her. That was not my experience. So if we can go ahead and kind of stretch our legs.
My friend Jacqueline, so she says, thank you. I say, Esquali. Esqualuma Antrapia. Zangao Uma Antrapia. Ne putsakuk kang manayan hupi matsiwa, ne pari tawang bayan bahan matsiwa, ne titsumobit ang ne kauwangwa, ne pati wangwa. Welcome everybody. Did you all get that? Kind of, sort of, maybe? Umhin matsiwa. Fine. Ayla, umhin matsiwa. Bracelet. Oi, umhin matsiwa.
Uli, air kamor.
Oi, umhin matsiwa. Umhin matsiwa. Zangaopi, umhin matsiwa. Oi, zangaopi. Well, thank you for participating in that. Most of the time, you guys are brave and you're smart. Most of the time when I start speaking to people in my language, which is Hopi, they freeze and they don't know what I'm saying, and they don't even try to begin to understand. And my point in doing that is really to make you understand that when these little kids came to school here in 1891 and all the way up until like probably 1950, English was a forced language on them. And when they came here, they had no idea. None of them spoke English. And every single tribe speaks its own language. So we don't understand each other. Her language is completely different from my language. And there are 22 tribes in Arizona. So you can imagine that kind of confusion. And so these kids it was corporal punishment if they didn't speak English. And so giving you the idea of what it's like to all of a sudden be spoken to in a different language. And that was nice, I didn't get mad at you because you didn't tell me your name. And I just said, no, that's not it. Duh, never. Is it never or Neva? Neva? Okay. So Neva would have been spanked, or she would have been made fun of, or she would have been, something, because she didn't get that answer right. So it's like, wow, how do you learn the language? It was forced, and the kids were beaten. The kids were, their mouth, even my mother. And my mother, she wasn't born in 1891, or, didn't go to school back then, but even my mother did not speak English until she was 8 years old, and then she was sent off to a mission school. So this is the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center, and we're really, really pleased to be open and able to share this history with everybody here. I came to school here. I told you in my language that my Hopi name is White Spider, and my villages are Sitsumovi and Walpi, and I'm of the Corn Clan, also the Water Clan. So that's the information I shared with all of you. And I share that because, once again, we're in a place where it was total assimilation. And that effort to repress who we are as American Indian people, as Native people, as an indigenous group of people, even though they said no, English only, when the kids came to school here, basically they were told everything about you is wrong. Your hairstyle is wrong, your clothing's wrong, your name is wrong, your religion is wrong. And so we're going to change it and make it better. That's the brutal history of all of these boarding schools. But I also say that these schools and the students here represent strength, and they represent integrity, and they represent resiliency. Because even though our cultures were suppressed, we went underground with everything. To the point where the same government who said, do not speak your language, asked the Choctaws in World War I to develop a code in their language and use it to deliver military messages. And they did. And it was so successful that in World War II, many tribes were asked to deliver or to create special codes and send off these military messages. And they did. And because the schools were based on the military model, the kids marched, they wore their uniforms, they marched everywhere. They were so used to a military lifestyle that when World War I came around, it was easy for the boys to just move off and go into military service. And to this day, American Indians have the highest rate of military service than any other group in the country. So we continue to send our young people off to war. This is Joseph Palin, and his name is on that white pillar in front of Memorial Hall, because Joseph came to school here in 1910, 1911, and he served in World War I. And at that point in time, we were not U.S. citizens, and we didn't have the right to vote. But that whole plaque is filled with the names of the students who served and then the two who were killed in action. In World War II, our most famous alumni is Ira Hayes. Everybody knows Ira Hayes, right?
Gila River.
Yeah. Who doesn't know Ira Hayes? And you can be honest, it's okay. That's okay. You don't know his name, but you know his picture. He was one of the flag raisers at Iwo Jima. And so we have the book here, flags of our fathers, and Ira is the one in the very back. His arm is up, and you can see something sticking out the back of his belt loop there. But Ira Hayes came to school here, and he was in that building. I don't know if he came into this building, but he definitely ate in the dining hall. So Ira Hayes is one of our most famous veterans from Phoenix, India. The decal that you see on the window there, that's a school-day class taken in 1941, and that's just one of the main classes of students who came to school here. On the glass door to the right of that photo is an older class, I think that's 4th and 5th graders. Again, it was taken right outside on the steps of this building here. So that kind of gives you an idea. Again, at that time frame, you notice that the uniforms are no longer being issued, but similar dresses are being issued. And look at the little girl's hairstyle. Everybody has that short bob. So they still couldn't wear their hair long. They couldn't wear it in their traditional style. And the boys all had really short crew cuts. So a couple of things to think about, you know, for American Indians, this quote, by the way, is from my great uncle Fred Caboti. And he says, when you first started attending school, they looked at you, guessed how old you were, set your birth date, gave you an age, and they would assign you a Christian name. Mine turned out to be Fred. So to give you an idea, you know, again, we are given our every tribe has its own naming ceremony and how they name their kids. And it's a very unique and beautiful ceremony. And the names mean something. So to be, his son's name was Lamawewisa, and it means something, and it's from his father's clan. So to then go to a name like Fred, it's like, what does that mean? How does that affect your identity? But that's how they gave names. So that identity and understanding who you are and how do you continue to survive, I think the lasting effects of boarding school, probably the most detrimental, is a lack of understanding what it means to be a parent. Because you had generations of families who came to boarding schools and they were raised in dorms and with a dorm matron, and some of them were really nice and some of them were really mean. But there was no good role model for a parent. And same with the boys. And so when you have kids, how do you take care of them? Who showed you how to take care of those kids? I think, if anything, that's probably the most lasting and devastating effect of boarding schools. And that in the military rigidness, that everything has to be just precise. You know, I talked about, you know, when I was a little kid, God help you if you spilled milk. You know, that was a federal case. And it's like a kid having an accident. But not if you're built, you grow up in a military lifestyle, you know, it's like, clean it up, you know, and hop to it, you know, and very abrupt and very, I think, aggressive way of raising a child. But that's how you know, that's what the setting was like here. When I was a young girl, every time we came to Phoenix, my parents brought us here to Phoenix Indian School because we always had relatives coming to school here. So we'd go visit them at the dorms, you know, maybe we'd take them out to dinner, maybe we'd bring them some snacks, maybe we'd go watch a football game or a track meet or something, or go into Memorial Hall for some kind of, you know, pageant or event. By the time I came here in '78, everyone was speaking their languages. Everyone spoke their tribal languages. We have this Phoenix Indian pageant, and that was a big thing. You know, the girl represented not the, you know, the entire school, and then all the different tribes who came to school here. We had a powwow club, we had Hopi club, Papago club back then, all these different clubs, and we were very, you know, proud to show and to share our cultures. You know, the guys from Mountain Utes used to sit out here behind Memorial Hall, and they'd bring their big drum out, and they'd just start banging on the drum, you know, like Saturday, Sunday afternoon, and it would resonate across the campus, and so you'd come over there, and these guys would be singing these 49 songs, and that's a whole other story. But any girl walking by, you know, they'd bring her name into the song and be like, oh, God, don't sing about me. But, you know, those guys would be out there singing. You know, we'd go out there and just hang out. And so, you know, the alumni come back here and we see our home. You know, my dorm was off of 3rd Street, the 3rd Street entrance. It's now a parking lot. And my younger sister's dorm is right behind mine. That's also a parking lot. My younger sister was in the band, and this was the music building when we came to school here. And so she actually had her band practice in that room you're meeting in. And on a grand opening day, I had the chair set up, and I didn't even realize, in band formation. And on the first row was for the VIP speakers, and the second 2 rows I set aside for alumni and also community partners. And so all 3 rows of VIP seating, and I look up and there's my sister in the 4th row at the end. That was her first chair clarinet in band, and that's where she wanted to sit. Come up here to the VIP. Like, nope, this is my chair, this is where I sat. And that's where she sat. I didn't even know that until after the grand opening event. So, I mean, like everybody, when we were here for grand opening, we had a woman who came in here and she was looking around. And she looks at this trophy, and so quietly and so humbly, she pointed to that and she said, "That's me." Rita Ventura. She hadn't seen her trophy since 1976. And then we were like, oh my gosh, let's get a photo. And so she's still here. It's little ties that we're looking for, and we want to interview as many alumni as possible. And Terry knows this, last year we had a reunion with the alumni from Phoenix Indian School. And I wrote my own little story because I'm a journalist and that was my whole career. And I sent it out to all these newspapers that border reservations in Arizona. And they all published my story about the reunion. It said, RSVP to come to the reunion. And so my phone rings and this man says, hey, I heard about the reunion. I want to come to the reunion. And I said, great. What years did you go to school here? He said, oh, I didn't go to school there. I said, oh, okay. Did you work at the school? No, I didn't work at the school. And he says, I'm not Native American. I said, okay, so what's your interest in our reunion? And he said that when he was in 5th grade, his parents moved here, and there were little houses on the other side of Memorial Hall for the staff. And for not just like the teachers, but the people who worked in the hospital, which was down there, the people who worked in the dining hall, the maintenance people, all of the staff, they had little houses throughout the campus for their families. He was in 5th grade when he moved here. He didn't leave until he graduated from high school.
Wow.
He said, this is my home, too. I said, yes, it is. You can come back to our reunion. And I made him wear the maroon and gold, and I said, march in the parade. And then in true little boy fashion, he said, can I bring my buddies? And I said, okay, who are your buddies? Turns out 3 other guys went to school here, lived on campus here because their parents also worked here, and they had become lifelong friends. And I said, of course, bring your buddies. And so they showed up and marched in the parade and came to the whole reunion and had a blast. Our colors are maroon and gold, and we say ASU stole our colors. I'll continue saying that until someone proves us wrong. But when we were established in 1891, ASU was being established at that time too under a different name. And there were not a lot of schools around. And so our teams played each other in football. Guess who won? So,
Not the teacher college.
Not the teacher's college. In later years, I spoke with an alumni from like the 50s, and he said they used to really look forward to getting the hand-me-down uniforms from ASU. Because, of course, the college, couldn't wear them for 5 years or whatever. They'd wear them for a couple of seasons, and then they would turn them over to PI because they were the same colors. And so the boys loved wearing the Sun Devil uniforms. So we've got some Letterman jackets and sweaters the alumni donated. Note that every yearbook says Redskin. That is a racist name, and do not, well, I'll just say this. The administration changed the name. Our actual newspaper was called the American Indian Report or something like that. And then the administration changed it to the Redskin. And then when yearbooks were invented, that name switched over. But note that our mascot, we were the Braves, and the girls' teams were referred to as the Bravettes, as that trophy says. So, and we were very respectful of that, being the Braves and the Bravettes, and we didn't fake war paint or have pictures or whatever. But I get that. People were like, what's up with the yearbooks? Like, yeah, we know. So, what else can I tell you? When we did the renovation, we really wanted to, all 3 buildings are on the National Register of Historic Places. So we won't touch anything on the exterior, but we had fair game for the inside. And we really wanted to do a mix of both the past and the present. And I think we achieved that with the balance of, you look up and you see the beams, that wooden door and the wall inside the boardroom are made from the reclaimed floorboards. We cleaned them up and put them on the wall there. And so you see the past and you see the future. And you also see it in the event room you're in, some of the brick that's exposed. Because again, in the beginning, the boys were taught trades and the girls were taught domestic skills to work in other people's homes. one of the trades that was taught was bricklaying. So we know that the students helped build the dining hall, and that was built in 1901, 1902. Therefore, it's older than the state of Arizona. They also built Memorial Hall. They helped build that. That was put up in 1922 to honor the students who served in World War I. And then they helped put up this building, which was put up in 1930, 1931. And this served as the grammar school. So you have the 3 buildings here that are on the National Register of Historic Places. And we wanted to show the students' work with that exposed brick back there. What else can I tell you about this place? I think that we really followed we have a charrette in the very beginning and set up, a tour here with the tribal leaders and community partners and city officials and alumni from the school, and we said 6,000 square feet, what is the use and purpose of this space? And the first thing they said was, have a gallery that will tell the story of the Phoenix Indian School. And so that's what this space is for. And then they identified a community room, so we can have events, which you're using right now. And then they said a commercial kitchen, because part of the whole boarding school history is the change in our diets as well, and the really unhealthy diet that we eat today. Consider that before Europeans arrived, we did not have cows, and we didn't have dairy. Most of us are lactose intolerant, and we didn't have refined sugars. We didn't have wheat. So now we look at the health disparities of American Indians and how many of us suffer from alcoholism. Well, what's beer and whiskey made out of? It's a foreign product. It's a foreign item in our bodies. We have the highest rate of diabetes. We have the highest rate of heart disease. So we look at what is the history behind this and how can we move forward. So the commercial kitchen is looking at, we'll have health and wellness classes in there, teaching indigenous cooking and food preparation. And on our grand opening day, we had chef Nephi Craig, and he made amazing food that only later on we realized it's vegan, because he didn't have any meat and he had no dairy. And people were loving. Did you have some food too? Oh my goodness! People were just like, "What is this?" And we had intended to hand out like samples, but we had so much, and I think people got busy outside. So anybody who wanted a full dinner could have a full dinner of the food in there. It was amazing. So just raising that awareness of indigenous foods and how good they are. So I'll take any questions. I think we have like a minute left or so.
Patty, is that your trophy in the case?
And so my work and my practice is very much a practice of healing. How do we bring out these stories and these narratives into different ways? The second phase of work is nahatat. Nahatat is the planning. So how do we create new planning themes, ways that are interactive? Exhibit that I curated at the Herd was called Confluence, Intergenerational, what is it? Intergenerational, I don't remember the subtitle. Anyways, not important. But the idea of it being brought together was through mentorship. The mentorship of 30 to 40 year-old mentors paired with mentees who were between the ages of 16 and 18. It was really amazing. They created incredible projects, but the reason why it was important was because over half of our Indigenous youth in Navajo community are under the age of 30. If we look right over at Salt River on the other side of Phoenix in Scottsdale, over half of their population is under the age of 18. So these are realities within Indigenous communities. We have, and it doesn't just it's not just people making babies. It's because of cultural genocide. It's because of the impact of the Phoenix Indian School Center, that these aren't statistics that we just arrive at and have to deal with, but that they have significance, and that we need to be thinking. One of the things I practice is, how do we facilitate cultural learning experiences for youth when I can recognize and know that over half of our Indigenous or Navajo community is living off the reservation now because of because of the reality that there are more economic opportunities here for their parents to get jobs. Like, how do they learn their language? How do they learn these things that they need to know? How do they have a kinalta, which is the example of the ina. Ina is life, or the implementation period, like, of this Navajo Diné thinking philosophy. And so, how do they do these things? This young girl is actually the daughter of one of my best friends that I worked with at the herd. And their family took time to be able to have this puberty ceremony, which is really significant because it's not just for her, it's for the entire community. Sihaseen is the reflection period of the Diné thinking philosophy. It is something that allows us to evaluate, to think about the kind of future that we want. This particular piece is by Wendy Redstar, who is an incredible Crow woman. And so I think what you see in all of this is that through this perspective of how we frame our thinking, how we frame the work and the lives that we have, that there is power and that there's knowledge, but that they are in service to others, right? So this idea of ownership of things being ours is really different than what we tend to think about. So I just kind of wanted to catch us up a little bit, wanted to kind of give you information in terms of framing of my work, but also like of my people, and that through this like aspect of the Diné thinking philosophy, that I'm really thinking about, well, what is my obligation? I'm kind of in prep for what we're going to talk about next. I wanted to think about just on your own for a little bit, you know, what do you consider to be yours in your practice? Like, what do you really think, a piece, a core belief of your practice that's yours? Like the ownership part, not what it is, but what came from you. Okay, so if you could just kind of percolate on that, and then we'll share out in a little bit. Like in a minute. When you're ready, if you want to share with your neighbor, that'd be awesome.
That sounds nice.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you? I'm good. That's a tough question. I think the answer is nothing. For me,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like really sort of thinking that like if I were gonna name like my values and my work, I think I could.
Oh, yeah, no. Yes, no, I wouldn't.
You know what I mean? Right?
Yeah, like come from elsewhere. Yeah, it's hard to I think maybe only artistic work or even like sort of social justice work. It's mine, it's my problem.
You want to give it like 15 seconds? And we'll bring come back together.
And even that's like to past generations of trans people, past generations of immigrants. I want my body's on here because they were there, right? So, that's even hard. It feels a little hard to clear, which is weird, right? That was an interesting thing.
Okay, so we can, circle back up.
This is a good question to think.
So if maybe two people can share
It's a good question.
kind of what they feel is kind of theirs in their practice, something that you kind of have ownership of.
what I consider to be mine in my practice, and the example I share with me is like my boss doesn't tell me to go pray for what I'm about to do. So the spiritual aspect of who I am is my practice, and nobody has ownership of that other than me. And that connected to who I am brings a different lens and framework of how I practice.
I think for me, to summarize nicely, that I can choose what perspective I engage my community and my acts and my work with. My dad was in the Air Force, so I moved around, but with each move, I was in a different community with a different history and a different set of values. And so choosing to kind of be open and respectful that it's not, I'm not bringing myself to all these places, but it's a privilege to be in these communities. And so recognizing sort of where I am in this moment in this community is my own sort of challenge.
I like to think about ownership, and that's really like the reason why I think this question is so interesting, because depending on the day and depending on the way that I want, both the way that I want to live in my values that I was taught and the ways that I think about how I actually live, sometimes there's a tension between the two, and that sometimes when I think that there's a lot that's mine are the days when I'm living out of my values. Because what I really want to be true is that my work is of service to all the people who've sat in a hogan and prayed for me. That I believe my life has been, will continue to be hopefully prayed into existence and come to fruition. That it really is always becoming. And so this question is one I return to quite often because I want the answer to be nothing. I want to think that nothing is mine. But sometimes I want to own things. Nice shoes, a cool award, like that'd be great. Those are things where I know that I'm being led further by my ego. And so my work is kind of like what you're saying, Erica. I feel that there's a spiritualness that exists within the work that I do, and that sometimes won't jam with other people, right? That's not necessarily meaning that that's your work. But this kind of question, that question kind of prepares us for this concept of keh. Keh is next to and kind of coupled with Indigenous is the action piece of the way that I was brought up. Is kinship. When I opened up this kind of session and talked about Yat and I shared my clans, the simplistic form is that is our clan system, that it's kinship. It's showing that we're connected to each other, that we are making sure that that our bloodline continues through things. But in reality, it's not just that we're related to each other, but that it's in being related to each other. By us being Balatchlai people, we are responsible to each other. That it's community engagement, it's community action, it's community strength. That's what Keh is to me. And that can look different. So here is a painting actually up from Patty's home that Keh looks like a ceremony. So this is a ceremony, a participation. My partner is Pueblo, and so there are a lot of community events and feasts and dances that he participates in. But because he participates in it, we participate in it. And so can look like this. Can look like wellness. We partnered with a group of people who do some awesome work around health and wellness, welfare culture, and it's really the aesthetics of a healthy living through Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous spirit. Can look like solidarity, showing up for people. Can also mean running. This is actually me when I was 12 during my Kennel Dust ceremony, and I'm running coming back to the Hogan after having run. My dad is the one who's taking the photograph. So Keh is something that is really important. It's really, I often say and was taught that when you're part of a community, that means you show up. Within Navajo culture, we believe that our medicine is important, and that when somebody is sick, when somebody's hurting, you go, you take food, you take water, because your participation is required in their healing. And that we are not all given the same knowledge. We are not all given the same stories. We all don't know our language in the same ways or the same words. We don't all know the same prayers. And the reason for that is if we knew everything, we wouldn't need each other, right? And so this example of recognizing that we all have medicine that we can give to one another is critical, and that we can move forward in new ways. So that's a particular example that I wanted to share. And we're going to, let's see. I want you to focus on a different question, but maybe can you write this one down for like, can this be your homework? Okay. Or you can snap a picture if that's easier. Because, you know, after sharing this idea of like, well, what are your principles? Right? Acknowledging perspective and religious outlook. It helps us reevaluate expert. And this is a term that I really have so much issue with, because oftentimes who an organization thinks is expert on a subject is often an indication of who they feel most safe with. And I think that that is something that really needs to be acknowledged when you're talking and thinking about what community means, because our community it's me. It's a variety of different people, a variety of different languages, a variety of different backgrounds, and yeah, they don't all get along. We have to acknowledge the tension if we're going to work through it. And so this aspect of thinking about values within community and recognizing that they're going to be different is really important. So that's kind of that. We're going to kind of wind down a little bit and do some deconstruction. But before that, I want to just all take a breath. All right? Can we do together? Yeah. Maybe take 2 breaths. All right? So just kind of breathe in. All right. One of my favorite practices that I think is really critical is creative destruction. It's really important as a cultural arts producer, as somebody who works in the community, to know 2 things. One, to know when it's time to let go. This poem is called Seeds of Resilience. Oh, beautiful being, be grateful you are the kind of flower which blooms in the hardest places. What a gift it is to surprise people. How you show your ability to breathe underwater as they try to drown you. Or when they push you off glass cliffs only to watch you fly. How gorgeous you are when your faith in yourself shines like the sun, burning away clouds of doubt bystanders cast out to try to shade your day. Frenetic grace. Those are the words I use to describe you, as your spirit moves with force, like lightning dancing on the hills during a warm summer monsoon. You strike. As your presence illuminates our dark world, we see you. We see how love is the seed of our resilience. You showed us that the trauma you've endured, survived, has not defined you. It is not the excuse for you to fall on top of when life challenges you, but it is the reason you can feel the love so intensely. You survived love droughts. You survived love that hurts, love that was unkind, never surrendering power, your power, to the struggle. You took the scars left on your body, peeled them away, sewed them together, created a quilt made from these imperfections and lies, the most intricate designs. It became the reassurance you'd get through the next trial, comfort affirmation. You have moved mountains before. This quilt is your comfort and proof that even pain can be worn eloquently. With your love, you showed us that trauma, heartache, betrayal was the greatest gift you could receive because it challenged you to be your own healer. You use the medicine in your heart to heal your wounds. Your example is lived out, prayed into existence, shared through this precious vessel that is your life. You heal by loving fearlessly. You heal by giving with grandeur. You heal by the constant help you offer your brothers and sisters. You've healed. You healed. You use your medicine is potent. It's priceless treasure, and instead of guarding it in fear as though it will run out, you pour it on thick to all who were hurting. Scarcity was not the way you were taught. You live in poetic reciprocity. This is the love language of your people. You save what we have left, not solely in hope, but with action. Action of your beating heart. Action of your helping hands and your strong backbone. Action that not only heals the pain, but harvests seeds and gardens that will take generations to grow. To some, this is daunting, to till soil of the land whose fruit you will never eat, enjoy, or relish. Oh, but you know the work you are giving will be felt by more than you. And this is the gift you pray for. To plant seeds of love today for people who you will only meet in your prayers. Yeah.
So we've got about 5 or 10 minutes left, and so I just wanted to recap all the amazing things that we talked about from the beginning of the day, the tour with Jacqueline. And then Michael will wrap us up with the survey. So some things that I want us to think about as we move forward in our time together as a cohort is the clip that Mary had you listen to, the D'Angelo clip. Something that she talked about in there was also, because I encourage you, if Mary sends it out, to watch the whole thing, is she also, as I watch everyone tonight and notice that we are all females in this space tonight, and one of the examples that D'Angelo gives is that she shows a picture of a room of all white men balding over the age of 65 and says, imagine that they are all talking about women's health care. And imagine that you are that one white woman that is asked to go into that space and represent all women. Mm-hmm. How is the hostility, how do you feel in that space to be the advocate for all women? And then imagine as if you were a woman of color in that space, right? And you're there to represent diversity. And the hostility and the lack of power that people have in those spaces, all women of color. And so when I was thinking about that today, I was also thinking about a quote that I've gotten from a colleague of mine that says, nothing about us without us is actually for us. And what I see with the Women's March is that it is easy for white feminism to think instantly what that looks like when we talk about women's health care. But when we talk about women of color, whether they're Black women, Native women, what does that look like in this space? And something that I think holds us separately from each other that I want to have you reflect on as we move into this space, continue in this space together, is that when Jacqueline speaks on this unity and this lack of possession, I think you were talking about my life is prayed into existence. And you talked about how I'm out of value alignment when I'm in ownership. Ownership and possession are values and tools of white supremacy. They are values and tools of capitalism.